Redditors, what is the most fucked up thing you have ever done? My grandpa was retired early due to disability and watched me during the day all summer until I was 11 to 12 and could chill alone after school. He spoiled the shit out of me. Took me to amusement parks, brought me to toy stores, all sorts of stuff. My parents told him to dial it back because I was being an entitled shit to them when I was 6 to 7. After this happened, I told my grandpa I wanted to go to the amusement park one day. He told me that my parents said no, but maybe we could go next week or the week after. I got incredibly upset. Being the manipulative sociopath I was, I put on the waterworks. He just said he was sorry and that he didn't want to upset my parents. So I looked at him and said, "You just don't love me anymore, do you?" He got really sad after I said that and told me that he loved me very much but we couldn't go. So I just kept going. "Why don't you love me?" Every time I said it, he got more and more distraught. Then he started to cry. I made my 56-year-old grandfather cry. The sweetest man I've ever known. The image of him crying while saying "please don't say things like that" is so deeply seared in my mind. I think it was one of the most important moments of my childhood as far as my emotional development. At the time I couldn't process it immediately. I didn't even apologize, I just went to my room. He didn't even tell my parents what happened. My mom said that around that time, it seemed like I matured a decade. I was quiet, polite, and incredibly well behaved. I treated my grandpa much nicer from that point forward. I couldn't bring myself to apologize for it until in my late teens when he was dying of cancer and I found out that he wasn't even blood related to me. He was my mom's stepdad. Just one of the best people humanity could offer, and I owe so much of who I've become to him. One night a few years ago, my boyfriend and his family, get Chinese food from our favorite little place. For some reason this night it doesn't sit well with me. An hour after eating I get that intensely sick feeling, like you have to poop so bad that you want to throw up. Whatever, I go upstairs and destroy the bathroom. It's important to note, there's 2 bathrooms upstairs and none downstairs, which is like a little apartment where my boyfriend and I stay. After I'm sure my bowels are empty, I go back down to lay in bed. Thought I could nap it off. Nah, about 30 seconds after laying down I get the urge to go again. I run upstairs and to my horror, both bathrooms are occupied. His sister is refusing to get out of the shower even though it's an emergency and his dad is blowing up the other toilet, presumably suffering a similar fate to mine. I begrudgingly go sit in bed and contemplate my options as the bubbling in my gut grows worse. Bust down the bathroom door and traumatize his sister? Make the 30-minute drive home? No, it was urgent. I even thought about shitting my pants, against my will, and dealing with the embarrassment. God, I don't want to subject my future in-laws to that. I begrudgingly realize my only option is to go outside like nature intended. Their yard is very open and it was a super bright moonlit night, so there was no place to do it without feeling super exposed. Except for under the trampoline. My thought process was, no one has used the trampoline for years, and it's out of sight and in walking range so no one could accidentally step in it. Great. I do my business, get soaked in the process. It was slightly raining and the trampoline was pouring water on me. Clean up with napkins and wet wipes, come inside. Immediately throw up in the trash can from the shock, embarrassment, anxiety and sickness. Clean that up and immediately go to bed. Everything was fine for a few days, until my boyfriend's dad lightheartedly tells me how he was late for work that morning. The dog had rolled in some shit and he had to get a bath. I felt like throwing up all over again. But thankfully everyone just suspected it was some type of animal poop. I flew to Morocco for vacation a couple of years ago, and one day due to acclimatization issues while in the swimming pool I realized that in an extremely near future I'm gonna have an explosive diarrhea. I ran to my hotel room and almost made it to my room but not quite. Long story short, since there was nobody on the hotel floor cause it was lunchtime, and I knew from the deep of my heart that I wouldn't make it to my room, I unleashed a load of my liquid chocolate thunder into a huge flower pot that was on the floor. Some poor hotel maid was definitely forced to clean that out and I couldn't even tip her. My hometown is generally pretty middle class to poor. There's a bunch of rich people that live in the woods and one of them had a kid that went to our high school and bullied the fuck out of the kids that weren't as wealthy. That shithead grew up and bought a Camaro last summer and removed the muffler so it would be the loudest fucking thing in town. On New Year's Eve of 2021, he decided to ruin a town tradition and lapped the town common with it during the tree lighting ceremony. While people were caroling and giving thanks. Summer of last year, me and a friend decided it was time to get revenge because nobody wanted to do anything about it. My friend's dad owned a junkyard and they recently got an old train horn from a busted diesel that ended up there. We spent a good week getting it set up in the back of his work truck and decided to wait on it for a little while. A month or so later, we found out he was having a party of some kind with other rich folks and his family, but we didn't know what it was about, so we carefully parked outside his house on the opposite side of his fence. Right as it was starting, we blasted the train horn and peeled out before anyone knew what happened. News got out later and we found out the party we bombed was actually a wake for his late grandfather. When I was about 15, a neighbor or ours stopped us in the road and chewed us out for riding our go-karts in the road. This despite the fact that it was a dirt road in a rural area which was the perfect place for riding go-karts. He was a complete asshole about it too. I don't know where I got the idea from, but I promptly went home, called the electric company, pretended to be the neighbor, and told them I wanted my electricity turned off as we were moving. It was the 80s, so they just looked the account up by name and address and promptly entered my request in the system. I'm sure it was just a minor inconvenience for them, but they deserved it in my opinion. The day before I stopped drinking alcohol altogether, I was in a really dark place for a number of reasons. And I was absolutely using alcohol as a crutch. One of the reasons why I was in such a bad place, emotionally, was because my cousin was in decline due to glioblastoma. I was actively seeing this person, that I love dearly, lose his sense of self and ability to understand conversations and situations. And he was young, just turned 50. There was a lot of light in the beginning, but considering that glioblastoma is effectively a stage-less brain cancer, it was almost guaranteed he would lose the battle. The day that I stopped drinking altogether was the day that I was supposed to drive him to a research institute for his monthly treatment and check-in. It was the only time I was asked to take on that level of responsibility, as his wife would normally take him. I helped in a bunch of different ways, like hanging out with him when he'd otherwise be alone, but this appointment was pretty big. I depressively drank myself into a stupor the night before and missed our meet-up time. I'd said that I'd be there no matter what, and I wasn't. The appointment happened, and he reassured me everything was okay as he knew the battle was over anyway. But I will never forgive myself for that. Even typing this out makes me feel like the biggest piece of shit. I wish I were sober then. I'm a recovered heroin addict, 9 years sober, and I have a lot of stories of how much of a shit person I used to be. I really can't gauge what my worst moment would be, but I can post a story or two definitely. One day, I was flat broken on my last bag of dope. My neighborhood pharmacist just recently was arrested for a DUI. Brainstorming, I came up with an idea to try and get some pills at the ER. I still had med insurance at the moment, so I thought this was my best option. My buddy came by and we were hanging out outside smoking a cigarette and trying to figure out how to get hurt, just enough to get some pills, but not enough to actually have permanent repercussions. There was this big-ass cinder block beside my garage and I decided to drop it on my foot in hopes of just breaking a toe at most. I stood outside on the concrete patio for about 5 minutes with the cinder block trying to hype myself up enough to drop it on my foot. I couldn't do it, psyched myself out too much. I told my friend that he would have to do it for me, and he said okay. He held it about waist high and dropped it on my foot. I knew it wasn't enough damage, so I told him that he needed to put it up higher and drop it again, to which he did. So go to the hospital, tell them that I was carrying boxes downstairs to the basement and dropped them when I slipped on the bottom step. So I go back, get x-rays, and I am in the waiting room. Doctor comes in and tells me that I've torn numerous ligaments in my foot and probably would hurt less if I had just broke my foot. Hearing this, I was excited, thinking yes, I just scored. I didn't care about the pain at the moment, just happy that I just potentially scored. They released me, and hand me a script. They wrote me a script for ibuprofen 800 milligrams. Defeat. Not trying to save a 6-year-old child after they got him out of the pool, since we got laws about victim responsibility. If you save a victim from danger, you'll be fully responsible for their well-being, economically even, so you have to pay for their treatment and the family doesn't have to move a finger. They are even entitled to sue you. This is to prevent random people who don't know what they are doing to apply wrong treatment. Kinda ironic in hindsight, and because I was only given a single class in all my life about first aid that did not stick with my memory on how to do things properly about 7 years before the incident. So even if I tried, it was likely I would screw up and damage the kid. I can't even measure properly my own strength sometimes and break things very easily. I can't even think what would happen if I lightly tried one of those movements to pump out water from the lungs on a kid. I could break the rib cage by accident. Apparently the other 30 to 50 people thought the same or were not thinking at all, so they all just encircled the kid, moaning, crying, but doing nothing. Someone called in emergency services, but they arrived around 20 minutes later. The kid was already dead when they arrived. Not gonna lie, this still haunts me a bit today. It makes me feel a little better to unwind about this sometimes. I'm not completely sure if I could have done something without making things even worse. Did drugs at work? I was a teacher. I had a toddler. I was teaching 212 high school kids, going through last 2 classes for master's program, and my dad was dying of cancer, husband was working a ton at a new job, and I just didn't have it in me to do it all. Snorting Adderall saved my hide. I would crush 4 pills throughout day and snort every couple of hours. It gave me an energy boost and I was able to focus on what needed doing. At night I would take a sleeping pill, then do it all over again the next day. Many years ago I lived in Japan, where the English school business is a big business. A good friend of mine had put years of work into developing his own curriculum. I was his head teacher and helped develop several original, educational textbooks for kids. He was ready to launch his school, but he needed financial backing because trying to incorporate in Japan, as a foreigner, is close to impossible. He found a local businessman to help finance the operation. My friend put down $50,000 and the local businessman put down $51,000, giving him a controlling share. I'm not sure exactly what happened. All I know is that the local businessman basically pulled out at the last minute and stole the $50,000 from my friend, and there was nothing my friend could do. This local businessman then decided to open up the school entirely on his own and cut my friend out using the material I had designed. This local businessman had never met me and didn't know that I existed, so my friend suggested that I reply to his advertisement in the newspaper, looking for a head teacher, and try to get hired so we could bring the school down from the inside. I did, and I was hired as the head teacher, and was put in charge of setting up all the classrooms, getting all the supplementary books, all of the toys, games, setting up the class schedules, and even setting up all the computers and software needed to run the business. Literally everything. I spent 3 months preparing to launch the school, building the curriculum, printing flyers, talking to parents of the kids and signing them up for classes, the whole 9 yards. But, 2 days before the school was set to open, I got my revenge. I threw all the computers into the garbage bin, which was collected the next day, and changed all the passwords for all the cloud services. I then threw out my cell phone and disappeared. Because this guy was sketchy, he had always wanted to pay me in cash, so he didn't have my bank information, didn't have my actual mailing address, and I gave him a fake one to start. So when I disappeared, he literally had no way to know who I was or how to find me. I found out through the grapevine later that this wound up costing that local businessman several $100,000, as he needed to pull cash from his other businesses to refinance this one and basically start from scratch. He missed the beginning of the school year, and all of the parents that he had contracted with were pissed and cancelled, and he was never able to recoup them as clients. Basically, I cost him an entire year. I don't regret it for a second, because this guy stole $50,000 from my friend, and basically took advantage of some young entrepreneurs who were just trying to get their business started. He got what he deserved, and I now have a backstory as a corporate saboteur. 8th grade, it was the last week of school and we had to turn in our end-of-the-year history assignment. Now I was very lazy with school stuff but would also get grounded if I got bad grades. I procrastinated so bad to the point there wasn't really a way out of it. One day in class, our teacher tells us he has a stack of history projects that were turned in that didn't have a name on them. I get a light bulb. I go over to the stack and find a project on Civil War era weaponry like cannons and stuff. Funny thing was, it actually did have a name on it. It was just written in pencil on black paper and hard to see. I erased the name, put my name on it and turned it in. Never got caught. Sorry Haley.